You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn. Today our guest is Caroline Kealey from Canada.
That's right.
Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, Claire. I'm so pleased to be here.
Oh, it's an absolute delight to have you here.
Excellent. Well, yes, I am calling in from my cottage, which is in the sort of rural part of Quebec. So
Oh,
a long
nice.
way away from you, but it's lovely to be here.
We're having a little run of Canadians.
Lovely. Well, you can't go wrong with that, Claire.
Last week we were in Nova Scotia.
Very good. Very good.
I feel I need to get a map out now and have a look, find out
Yeah,
where you all
probably.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's such a pleasure to have you here, Caroline. Tell us a bit about your coaching journey.
Thank you, Claire. Well, I was thinking about that my understanding is few people enter into coaching from the front door. Most of us get to it from a side door. And that is certainly my experience. So I got into coaching as a result of an initial focus on consulting. My practice has been in communications and change consulting for about 25 years. And over the years, what started off as really primarily offering consulting turned into facilitation and eventually coaching. Now, my focus primarily is to do leadership level group coaching, particularly in the areas of communications and change.
Nice. Nice. So, results map, which is your
Yes.
thing.
Exactly. That's it. So I'll tell you a little bit about that, how that sort of path leads in. So initially, when I started my firm, most of the work I did was around strategic communications planning. And I found that there seemed to be something peculiar in the model in that most of the clients had similar challenges and the process was repeatable, but yet the subject matter would be quite different, of course, from one client to another. And I thought, well, really, it would be better to sort of package a process for thinking and working strategically in communications rather than outsourcing this, which is, of course, a weird realization for a consultant to come to. And so this is how I came up with this concept of the results map, which does have, of course, a nod to the UK because it's based on the London tube map and sets up a sort of simple mental model or framework for thinking and working strategically in communications. It can be used for developing a strategic communications plan, but more commonly is just to have a framework that's really quite fundamental in terms of looking at the elements or what we call junctures of prepare, plan, implement, and evaluate. Then over the years, as I got more interested in the change space, we developed a sort of sister product, which is the results map for change, again, with the same idea of the graphic language of the London tube map with those kind of components to think about not only what are the elements to consider when working in change, but critically the sequencing of them. So that's sort of our body of knowledge is called the results map system, which is an end-to-end methodology covering communications and change.
So, how did you get from noticing to a map?
That is a good question. That is a good question. It's almost a little over 20 years ago now that I was doing a presentation and just thought, there has to be sort of a framework for visually explaining these component parts. And it's interesting that you probably have seen from your own experience, communications generally and communication practitioners specifically tend to be very reactive, tend to be very ad hoc. And what I have found is that actually we can save ourselves a lot of time if we can plan in advance, even if it doesn't necessarily have to mean a big, heavy planning process, because let's agree, nobody's in the market for that these days. But to have some level of discipline and rigor in thinking things through. So then the concept of a map came to mind, and then we ended up sort of playing with that in our brand and in fact adopting it as the company name.
Oh, nice. But it sounds as though there was probably quite a lot of iterations and pain in the middle.
That is very perceptive, Claire. Absolutely, absolutely right. So, over the years, we experimented with a bunch of different models because really my passion is around knowledge transfer and developing thinking tools. And
Mhm.
so, what kind of lights me up is the alchemy between what I can do as an external expert or partner and what the client knows best. And so that's sort of the philosophy of the results map model. And we toyed with different things. At one point, it was software as a solution, but then that became very heavy and clunky and involved lawyers who had to approve getting a license. And of course, I don't run a technology company, and that's not where I want to focus. And so we've gone through now about 5 or 6 different iterations, and I think we're hitting a little bit of a better sweet spot now, which is first of all to think about knowledge transfer and capability development in the broader context, but to offer it through a mix of synchronous and asynchronous experiences. And so
Ah,
that I would say is probably a light that went off in my head as a result of the pandemic. And I think an urge that everybody has to be more intentional about why are we gathering and what is a purpose that matters. So that might be a facilitated retreat, or it might be a training session. But then how do we match and sort of strengthen that synchronous experience with an asynchronous piece? And that is the results map system, so that people, for example, might go to a workshop on leading change or on strategic communications. Hopefully they try out different tools, apply them to their context, and then we equip the participants with the results map system such that then they've got these tools, resources, samples, and importantly, and that's another sort of post-pandemic thing, because people are working in such a fragmented and distributed way, what I'm hearing from teams is that it helps level set a common mindset or a common nomenclature, even. So that if the boss is talking about content development, well, what are we talking about? Okay, well, we might be talking about developing a content map or a message architecture. And then we offer a template and a sample of that. Of course, clients are welcome, and they've done fantastic work in adapting these things in a way that works for the particular context. But at least we're kind of not reinventing the wheel, and we have found that we reduce the friction to collaboration and integration, both in our communications and in our change practice, to the extent that we can offer this simple methodology and tools that are available online.
oh, simpler. You're talking my language.
There you go.
So what are some of the wins that you're most proud of in the work that you do, Caroline?
Well, I appreciate the question. I have to say, I love my work, Claire. When I hear people who are counting down the days to retirement, this is just not in my consciousness, because I love my work, and in particular to see teams be lit up and have really meaningful shifts. Personally, while I do individual coaching, which I also enjoy, there is a magic to working with a team and seeing a team shift that I especially appreciate. So some of the big wins have been supporting leadership teams through the pandemic. And really, I was in a sort of allyship model to try to figure out, how are we going to work? How do we keep the wheels on the bus? How do we be attentive to the emotional context? I have found, perhaps because our clients are mainly in sort of the public and para-public space, a lot of organizations have been trying to talk or email their way through change, as opposed to reach people on an emotional level through conversation, through intentional gatherings, through really a level of candor and openness to the fluidity of groups and how we experience change that was quite different. So I would say that has been particularly meaningful to me, is to support people through some very, very tough challenges, which of course existed in our change practice before the pandemic, but during and after the pandemic, which still is very, very present in terms of navigating this sort of uncharted territory and ambiguity. How do we sort of figure out which ways north and be attentive to supporting teams in a way that speaks to them and that matches the peculiar environment we find ourselves in.
Mhm.
You know, I think I really am fascinated by this post-pandemic era in which generally I find very consistent patterns. I actually wrote a blog post called WTF is going on in my attempt to try to put a finger on this. But it's sort of this predictable pattern where many teams are feeling overwhelmed and yet underwhelmed. So
Ah,
there's this sort of digital overload and people are up to their eyeballs. And yet there is a weird emptiness, I think, a bit of a collective ennui in terms of what have we got to show for it? What does all this mean? You know, this idea that we are in a society now that is information rich but meaning poor. And
ah.
so I would certainly not say that I have the solution to this, but there are patterns that I observe absolutely consistently, and helping find ways to redefine and kind of reimagine teams and functions as some of the most meaningful and interesting work I have the honor of doing with many, many remarkable teams across Canada and now increasingly internationally.
Don't know where to go now. There's lots,
Yes,
so many little
little
threads
pegs.
to pull. I'm curious about what you say about the difference between teams and one-to-one, and I'm really interested, Caroline, to find out what is it, because some of our listeners are team coaches, some of our listeners are one-to-one coaches, some of them are, you know, wondering about what it's like over there.
Yes.
What do you see as the difference for you? What do you feel the difference is? That was a double question.
Yeah,
Sorry, everyone.
that's interesting. Yeah, that you've got exactly the right framing there, Claire. It is a feeling, and there is some kind of magic energy that happens that the best way I could think of it is symphonic. When you see
Ah,
a team coming together and there is a magic that is unpredictable and that sort of emerges from collective conversations and wisdom and insight. And so that's what I find especially delicious and satisfying. And I think whether it's in my personality or just a question of preference, there's something about that group dynamic that I find very satisfying. There is a feeling, certainly, of kind of being on a high wire act without much of a net, because you've got, generally, I work at the executive level, so you have a bunch of leaders who will have many different agendas and all kinds of contexts, and how to be sort of dancing with that energy in the room, coming in very well prepared. You know, some of the executive retreats I do might take months to plan, and I have everything all worked out, but I'm always starting with the premise that this is the group session. And so if we need to adapt, then let's do that to be responsive to needs. And that happens almost universally. That then, although everything was all planned and there was an agenda, we generally remain true to the objectives, but the way in which we achieve them changes. And that is sort of a yeah, you know, I'm thinking of it almost as movement or dance.
yeah.
It's almost like being able to read what's going on in a room, be respectful to that energy. I'm exquisitely focused on the idea that certainly my fees pale in comparison to the value of the time, energy, mental space, and opportunity cost of having a bunch of executives in a room. And therefore, it is my duty to make sure that every minute counts, including, of course, having good break time, and including being open to seeing if something is not quite working and that we need to go in a different direction. And so when I contrast that to individual coaching, I would say that I really enjoy in terms of the depth of rapport that I can build, and which I must say surprises me, that can be built online with many, well, both the coach that I work with and also when I work with coaching clients. It's remarkable to me the level of connection and intimacy that can be built. So there is a special magic to that. But I think I'm somehow more wired to the group dynamic and the organizational impact that
Mhm.
can happen, which can be, and I've seen it happen, absolutely transformational, because now you're working with a bigger community. And if you can have that level of alignment and that level of shift, it can be very powerful, of course, particularly at an executive group.
I love the way you describe team facilitation. It's beautiful. And some of those words that you used were music, the dance,
Yes.
the symphony, the
Yes.
trapeze. It's like you've been in this room listening to some podcasts that I've just recorded in the last week or so.
Interesting.
Uh,
Yes.
I had a conversation with Micah Leibrandt, who does a lot in the States. Do you know
Yes.
Micah?
Yeah. Just from LinkedIn.
Yeah, and
Yes.
she was talking just a couple of episodes ago about what we were talking about, what not knowing is about. And she said,
Yes.
isn't it like the trapeze? And then we had this whole conversation about the trapeze and the safety net. And you just said that, which is a beautiful
Interesting.
thing. The symphony.
Yes.
So I've just written a book with Lucia Baldelli, and part of the second part of the book is me really expanding this idea of the music of coaching, the sound of the conversation,
Wow.
and listening to the sound of the conversation. And I'd never thought of it like symphony, but as you said symphony, I thought, of course, that's the difference between one-on-one and group.
I think so. I think so, and I'm very keen to read that book, Claire, because I think you're bang on that there is a sort of sensory dynamic to it, including the sound of coaching and, of course, the sound of silence.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's one of the chapters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I will definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, do. The Human Behind the Coach, it's called.
Yes.
But it could be the human behind the leader. So just
Yes.
build for me, or let's build together, this
Sure.
concept of the symphony in the room when it's a team.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I'm actually working on a video at the moment to try to bring this to life, because it's a concept I use a lot in workshops, and it immediately lights a light bulb. But I think it would be more compelling with, of course, a real symphony and that experiential and almost visceral feeling that you get when you arrive in the symphony, and you hear often what can sound like a bit awkward sounds when each individual instrument is warming up, and you hear these things that sound like a cacophony or dissonant. And then all of a sudden you start to see the sort of symphony and the human spirit gelling into creating something bigger than the individuals, which is quite transcendent, really, when we think about it. And of course, what's interesting from a leadership perspective is that the conductor doesn't make a sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that I find quite a useful analogy.
Yeah.
And to be candid, I would say it has taken me decades of practice to get to the point of being comfortable to let go and see where the music takes you.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of the difference between a more formulaic approach to training, for example, even to facilitation, to now what I do is more of a sort of a mashup, I would say, methodologically. Some of it, a lot of it is facilitation and holding space for important conversations, having tools and techniques and methods of popping out wisdom and creating a safe space, but that's also constructive. So there is that facilitation piece. There's often a dash of consulting, because my clients tend to come to me because of my background in communications and change. And so I am not just a neutral traffic cop or process person, because I do have an opinion, and we agree generally that they want to hear it. And also the value is really to unlock the wisdom and the energy and experience in the room. And so we're sort of trying to bring all of those facets together. And a big part of it to me, which I think is something generally in coaching that sometimes is lacking, is the follow through. And so I notice in terms of group sessions that I do, executives have become more impatient than ever. And so you really can't have a group of senior leaders in a room and not have a very clear, crunchy path forward as to what's going to happen after this session, including simple things that may seem administrative but are absolutely critical in terms of where are all these ideas going? Are they just floating out into the ether, or are we capturing this in some kind of fashion, not only a simple document, but also follow-up steps? And so that's the thing is, I would say, again, to be very candid among the coaching community, that is something that I hear as a level of cynicism when I show up. And people say, oh, here we go. Here's another coach, or here's another change management consultant who probably has a butterfly on her website, And so there is this sort of disconnect. And so I have found that having real clear objectives, having very focused conversations, and an outcome is absolutely vital. And then eventually people can trust that they have actually invested their time in something worthwhile that has a sustained effect after the session. So I'm curious, how does that land for you?
Well, I love the action. I love the practical stuff. Because insight's all very well, isn't it? But actually, it's what difference is it going to make in the world? As you were talking about the symphony and the sound and not playing your own tune.
Yes.
I was reminded of the Benjamin Zander book. It's really old now, The Art of Possibility.
Yes, totally.
And I know he wrote, it's yellow, everybody. I'm sure you can get it secondhand on Amazon. The Art of Possibility by Benjamin Zander. So he was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra.
Yeah.
And he talks about leadership, doesn't he, from the positions in the orchestra. And I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking, nothing's new, and yet, as you were talking, it's such a beautiful build out of that learning and that insight that he had about the conductor and leading from the second chair and all those wonderful, wonderful chapters.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And in fact, that is something, especially in my change leadership practice, I find quite interesting and worthwhile, is to revisit some of these more traditional or established views on leadership and then bring them to the fore in terms of the current context, including this idea of the orchestra conductor leading the music. The other one that I've had lots of interesting conversations about is Daryl Connor's brilliant work on managing at the speed of change. So Daryl Connor is sort of my guru of change leadership, and I've had the pleasure of working with him and being certified in his strategy execution methodology. And one of the things that Daryl is most well known for is the idea of the burning platform. That people, when they're facing a time of change, almost have to be trapped, if you will, between fear and hope, like the guy who was on the North Atlantic oil rig, and this was where the analogy originally came from that he came up with, who says, well, my oil rig is on fire, so either I jump in the ocean and I might have a chance of surviving, or I stay here and death is certain. So that was that level of acuity that he was really talking about in terms of burning platform, which has been, I think, really codified in the world of change and coaching and change as a premise of what are the conditions necessary for someone to leap into change. On the other hand, I hear regularly pushback of saying, well, now people have so many burning platforms that we can't keep burning platforming people to death. And so that's interesting. And I find this time, which is so disruptive, we're in so many different zones of gray and ambiguity, that revisiting some of these sort of certainty anchors and fundamental principles that have guided us is interesting.
Yeah.
Personally, I still think there is merit to the burning platform model. But somehow, how do we attend to that with empathy such that people are not, shall we, push the analogy to its extreme, burning out and just checking out, which is really becoming an organizational problem.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. I think there's a lot more to be done around the orchestra, isn't there?
Yes. I totally agree. So I will have to keep you posted as I work on this video, because I just met with a video producer last week, and I said, I want to play with this idea so that I could include it in workshops, because I think that could really come to life in an interesting way beyond just the word. But definitely when you work with a group of leaders and you just use that expression to be working in a symphonic way, immediately causes a shift.
Yeah.
And I see this also with communication teams. I work with a lot of communication teams, most of whom struggle with delivering strategic value and impact and integration, because you see teams that are distributed. So somebody's doing internal communication over here and social media and events, but very few people have the symphonic thinking and mindset and imagination to make this work as a whole, in a context where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah.
Because what you've just described there is a series of bands.
Yes. Exactly.
All playing a different kind of music in different places around the organization.
That's it. And so where do you hold space between some level of control, but also some openness to human expression and that authentic expression and creativity, which is core to certainly the magic of music, but also in the communications work that I work in, where command and control is only going to get you so far. And so generally, we sort of play with ideas like, for example, freedom within a framework. Can we agree on a certain intent? And then can we sort of create those parameters and then let people have some level of agency, which absolutely is, I think, a precondition to having people work at their best, is to have a real sense of agency, even if it's not huge. Somebody might be at a junior level, but if you can sort of give them an opportunity to have some latitude in the way in which they work or the way in which they use their own instrument for impact, you definitely get just a whole different level of performance.
But it's good if you're all using the same genre of music.
Totally. Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So we've moved on to music from your tube map.
That's it. That's all good. Love it.
Going back to the tube map.
Yes.
If people are interested in building from what you've learnt,
yes,
what opportunities are there for them to do that?
Well, you've put it exactly right. Building on what I've learned is exactly what I'm passionate about. So at our website at resultsmap.com, we've got an Explore Hub, and it has a whole bunch of free tools, samples, worksheets, video training. So lots of content across strategic communications and change leadership. And so that's probably the best place to go. And I offer a bunch of workshops for individual teams, but in terms of easy access to resources, these products and sort of thinking tools have been developed in co-creation with my client practice over now almost 25 years. And so that is exactly what I aim to do, is try to package what I've learned in a transferable way so that we can have knowledge transfer. And I have found that it's interesting that if you can give people a tool for example, like a change planning canvas. Well, then you can unlock creativity because people know where to start. You're giving them sort of a template, not to say that it's all about the template, but it at least is a starting point for a conversation. And all of these resources are specifically designed for co-creation in a collaborative way, so that people would get together and say, yeah, we're doing, for example, the classic thing is a group of leaders are doing transformation, but nobody knows what transformation is. And the finance person thinks it's about money, and the facilities person thinks it has to do with buildings, and the org person thinks it has to do with the org structure, and it's probably all of these things, but nobody has seen the whole or moved between kind of information dissemination and sense making. And so the idea would be, okay, we can grab and go this simple one-page tool, and can we just have a conversation? Could totally be online using a Miro board or whatever you want to do to get ideas. But that way we are getting at a higher quality insight more quickly, as opposed to let's have a meeting and talk about what is this transformation all about, which generally is not going to end well.
You've just so beautifully described let's look at it instead of talking about it, haven't you?
Yes, that's it. Well put, Claire. Well put. Exactly.
Yeah. So, Caroline, if people want to have a conversation with you about your stuff, how do they do that?
I'm very happy to connect. So LinkedIn is probably a great platform, and I have an active LinkedIn presence, or on my website, my email is right there at resultsmap.com.
Perfect. So, everyone, Caroline Kealey on LinkedIn. I'll put her LinkedIn thingy in the show notes.
Lovely.
Caroline, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Claire. It's been really a treat to have a chance to chat with you.
And you, and I need to go for a walk and think about symphonies.
Lovely. That sounds like a beautiful plan.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. If you want to get it as it drops, please subscribe or follow on the platform where you listen to your podcast. And if you want to put a little review, that would be amazing. See you next time. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Claire.
Bye-bye, everyone.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching Inn, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.